out in Belarusia, and there's mass demonstrations. This woman she wins the election but is prevented from taking office. The other guy barricades his presidential palace and starts fighting with tanks, and the whole thing starts to melt down. Well, that's why we need a European Union mediation service. We don't want war starting in Belarusia, for God's sake. Democracy is supposed to be a non-violent way of dealing with political differences. That's what the European ideal, that's what our culture is about. That's why we have a European Union. Because we don't do the Hitler route of mass demonstrations. We don't do the Stalin route of kill all the people that don't agree with you. No, we have democracy. And so peace, democracy can only work when there's peace. And also when there's education properly, advanced. Democracy breaks down when you have manipulation of outcomes, and that's when Cambridge Analytica and stuff. Corrupt democracy. That's why Britain is no longer really a democracy. It's a managed democracy by the party in power. Well, that's Belarusia. That's corrupt land. No, that's not good enough. So there we are. That's the European Union Mediation Service, and I'm in the process of negotiating how we can do it. Today we also celebrate World Indigenous Peoples Day. The 9th of August today is a worldwide UN-sponsored event. There's a webinar about it tomorrow, and I've been involved with Indigenous peoples' rights, for a long time. As a philosopher, I've always kind of taken a great interest in my periodic table of the world's religions, which is here. I've included all the indigenous religions. They're the green ones, so-called pagan or primal religions. And when I first started teaching religious studies at Birkbeck College way back in the 90s, early 90s, I was the guy that did the lectures on primal religions. So I became an expert in Aboriginal, Maori, African, shamanic, pagan, European, all the rest of them. And I've always had a great interest, and it was around that time I was getting involved in Druidry, which is one of the boxes here. And realising that the Celtic traditions of the British Isles and Europe had their own indigenous tradition, which is, why I'm so interested in them. So I celebrate this day today. As a Canadian, I've always been interested in the Canadian Indian, American Indian culture, deeply inspired by it. At my father's funeral, I read out a quote from a Canadian Indian from the Crowfoot tribe. And yeah, I mean, the wisdom of the primal people around the planet is what we need now. Because the sort of monotheistic conquering, there's only one God crew, and they always argue about which is the God that is the only one. That sort of philosophy hasn't worked. That's led to colonialism, imperialism. World War I, World War II, as the only God people slaughter each other in the name of their only God. Well, we've got to listen to the wisdom of the primal people. There's lots of gods and goddesses. They're in nature, they're in every tree, they're in every spring, in every hill, they're in you and me. Yes, there's an overarching unity. There is a one God, but that is so subtle and profound that it doesn't mind not being recognised, and it doesn't mind having a plurality. It's embedded into all the rest of us and the rest of the deities. That's Shintoism, that's Taoism, and that's Druidry. And that's the ancient Egyptian wisdom. So they had their pantheon of deities, Isis, Osiris, Ra, etc. Ma'at, Thoth. But then they had the overarching divine intelligence of the Hermetic scriptures, whereby the one emerges from the pantheon, is not imposed on the pantheon from above, like sort of, we're going to slaughter you, you're all bad gods. No. The one emerges from the council of the gods. And this is what the Sumerians also saw with the council of the Abkalus, the sages. And there are different deities. Every city had its own deity. Some worshipped, Babylon worshipped Marduk or whatever. Others worshipped, Ea, god of wisdom. And gradually there arose the wisdom tradition, that there is a unity behind the diversity. And so indigenous religions greatly interest me as a philosopher of religions, and how they evolve into monotheisms. But I think, as I say, there are different forms of monotheisms, and those monotheisms need to evolve back to a place of greater sophistication, whereby they themselves realise that they're part of a bigger sacred tapestry, which I've tried to, colour in the periodic table. It's the first time anyone's attempted this, and to show how within the unity there is a diversity, and within the diversity there's a unity. Just to give one example, I've been studying this week. I'm writing a book at the moment about divine mathematics, or religio mathematica it's called. It was inspired by the work I did for the periodic table of religious and philosophical traditions. You see, it is numeric in that the numbers of devotees, worshippers, teachers, sages in each one is numbered, and this comes in the text behind the. There's a website and a book you can get which explain the whole thing. And then the question about chronology, when were they found, when were they formed, and so on. There are lots of mathematical puzzles about religions. Why are there so many? I mean, if there is one God, how come there's so many? And even within religions, like here you have Judaism, well, why are there so many different kinds of that if there's just one God? Different kinds of Islam, well, why are there so many kinds, And Christians, there's loads of kinds. Here they all are. Anglican, Episcopalian, Methodist, Quaker, Unitarian, Jesuit, you name it, Roman Catholic, etc. And the numbers of each of these are given. Well, why so many? So I'm interested in the area of religious mathematics, exploring it's an unexplored territory. I feel a bit like an explorer who's just found an unknown continent, and the book I'm working on is about religious mathematics, and I'm hoping it'll inspire other scholars and colleagues, and we can found a new discipline, because there are many profound questions which are religious mathematical questions, and I totally refute the idea that maths is a boring subject that has nothing to do with religion. No, on the contrary, it's a tool. Mathematics is a sophisticated tool which can be brought to bear on religious issues, including religious conflict, and colleagues working in the field of conflict resolution and peace research use mathematics to sort of compute outcomes that can be peaceable. And there's some computerization of this that's been going on. Well, let's add in the religious conflicts and let's solve them. Peace is, according to me, is the outcome of the final equation. I'm working on the peace equation, whereby you can put all these religions into the variables and you can work out a sort of peace outcome. That's what I've tried to do with my interfaith peace treaty. I've written the text of the outcome, like the Alan Turing of the Enigma code, which we have to crack to get this crazy world in peace. So yes, and in doing the research for this, I've discovered a very interesting group of religious followers and believers in the Kurdish community of Western Iran, some in Turkey and around there. And they call themselves the people of truth, the Al-Haq, the people of truth. And they have a very interesting cosmology I've been exploring. They're also sometimes called the Yasani, and they believe that different prophets, different sages come at different times. It was Zoroaster, and then it was Moses and Abraham, and then it was Jesus, and then it was Muhammad. And then in the wake of each of these great prophets, there come different cycles, different eras. So you have the first is the cycle of belief, where you sort of implicitly believe everything that prophet says. Then you have a sort of cycle of scholarship where you go into it and you think, I'm not sure about that one. You kind of think about it. And then you have an era of, symbolism, whereby you kind of have to have the right beard that Muhammad wore, or you have to pray an exact 5 times a day that Muhammad apparently wants, or you have to cross yourself in the right way that Christians want. So it becomes more obsessed with ritual. Anyway, eventually, the tradition leads enough people to demand truth and say, no, what's the truth behind all these rituals? And that's when the people of the truth come to the fore. And these are people who say, no, you don't have to do the ritual. I don't care if you pray 5 times a day in a certain way. as long as your being is prayerful, pray some of the time, have some kind of regular prayer. The Quran doesn't specify 5 times a day, as far as I can tell. It specifies regular prayer and regular charity. That's what it says, regular prayer. And that's about focused intent. So the people of truth, anyway, there's about 2 or 3 million of these amazing people. I love them. And they're a sort of Gnostic, esoteric group. Scholars detect in them traces of Mithraic, the worship of the god of truth. And they're quite similar to the Yazidis. They both seem to have a sort of septenary of 7 helper spirits that help God to manage the affairs of the world. Because the world is complicated and needs at least 7 main archangels that help. And one Kurdish scholar has said these all descend from indigenous Kurdish, ancient, probably pre-Zoroastrian traditions. And it includes the Yarsanis, the Yazidis and the Alawis, and they all go back. So they're the indigenous culture of the Kurdish people. And so I'm saying, let's celebrate on World Indigenous Day. Let's celebrate the primal wisdom of people throughout the world, including in the Middle East. Now, unfortunately, these particular people are being persecuted by the extreme Muslim Wahhabi types that the West recruited for our stupid intelligence wars in Russia in Afghanistan. And we so-called trained them up to, kill Soviets. I mean, this was, I think, a mistake and an ethical error. I was campaigning for peace in Afghanistan, probably when some of my viewers were not even born yet, in the kind of the 80s, really, early 80s, mid-80s. And going to meetings in London, campaigning as head of Philosophers of Peace then, for peace in Afghanistan. I still think peace is always preferable to war. And that's one of the fundamental principles of the World Intellectual Forum. We ask that people sign up that intellectual discourse about differences is always preferable to shooting and killing each other and stabbing each other. That puts all the aggressive Stalinist type solutions out of the window. So anyway, the Kurdish indigenous traditions of the Assanis and the ancient people of the truth, I commend them to your studies. Now I want to move on, and also I want to talk about coming to the end of my talk, I want to talk about silence. Silence is a very interesting phenomenon, and one of my unfinished books is called The Phenomenology of Silence. I want to study it in various forms. There's a silence of cowards when you ask somebody and they daren't speak because they know they'll get into trouble. You get that with kids in schools, did you do that terrible deed, throwing ink all over the wall? Dead silence in the class, they're afraid, Then there's other kinds of silence. The silence when Christ was asked by Pontius Pilate, what is truth? What was that? That was probably some things are too big and complicated to explain right now type silence. There's the silence of Buddha when he held up a flower and gave the flower sermon. He didn't speak a word, but Kashyapa and others reached enlightenment during that silence. So there's a silence pregnant with enlightenment. There's the silence of lovers when you love somebody so much you don't need to speak, you just gaze into their eyes, and it's like looking into the infinite universe. You can see galaxies and stars in the people of their eyes. That's true love. And then you're reduced to silence. Maybe you have a telepathic rapport, you don't need to speak. That's the silence of Meher Baba and other great spiritual seers who often talk the silence like Buddha did. And then there's another kind of silence, and I want to focus on that other kind of silence right now, today, briefly, which is the silence of the Omerta. It's the silence of a criminal gang who are up to their neck in blood and are doing wrong things, and they know it, but they've sworn each other to secrecy and silence. And to join the clan, the club, you have to swear to secrecy. That often is at the root of what we can call conspiracies and violence. You know, if you think about it, terrorist groups have their own kind of omerta. I can only join a given terrorist group if I swear to use violence against the bad guys, if I swear not to reveal anything, even under torture. And, you know, that's a mark of bravery. Well, that's what the Stern Gang was based on. It's what Jewish terrorists are based on. It's what Islamic terrorists are based on. It's what all terrorist groups are based on. Well, I don't agree with that, you see. I'm a joyist. I don't agree with terrorism. And I don't think people should have to swear an oath of non-revealing if people are being criminal. I think, on the contrary, it's time to speak out. So I would like to say, and this is me coming back to Brexit, I would say that Brexit is a kind of omerta. Everybody in British politics knows it's bad for Britain. Everybody with a brain knows it's illegally implemented. It was badly thought through. It was falsely sold to the British people. It was illegally done by cheating during the referendum. And it's got about 150 catastrophic consequences already in loss of jobs, loss of prospects, closure of freedom of movement. People, you know, it's going to have cataclysmic effects on Europeans living and working and studying in Britain, and us Brits living abroad in France and Spain and all the rest. I'm one of them. So it's thousands of tragedy effects. But the one thing the British system is unable to do, from the Queen on down to the Prime Minister of the day and whatever, is admit it was wrong and say sorry and just reverse it with a second referendum. It's like they've all sworn an omerta of, no, we know this was wrong, but we personally are going to benefit from it. You know, we are the mafia chieftains of British military capitalism. It will be good for our particular billions stashed offshore. That's the Rees-Mogg types. So anyone that wants to join the Conservative Party has to swear this oath of omerta to not question Brexit. If they do, they're thrown out. Now that's how a pernicious mafia-style omerta has taken over my country, and it's premised on people not speaking out. And so politics has now become, in my country, the art of silencing. You know, if you want to get anywhere, you have to not speak about this crime. It's the same with 9/11. Again, that was a crime in America, done by people with insider knowledge. That's been proved by materials engineers. Somebody was involved in planning and effecting that. Not just, you know, the Osama bin Laden bunch. They had a role, but not the key formative role, it's thought. Buildings are brought down by inside demolition charges. And that's been proved by material scientists. If you look at websites of architecture and engineers for 9/11 Truth, you know, read the data, study the University of Alaska's finding. There was a peer-reviewed, you know, scientific study of how the buildings collapsed, and they were not done by the planes alone. Given that, there were other causes. So why have the media not spoken out? Why have senior politicians not spoken out? Well, it's the same thing. It's the principle of omerta. It's the principle of, yes, we know it was criminal. We know that Bush and you know, other people in the administration, you know, Dick Cheney and all these other people knew it was a fake. But they've all sworn this oath of omerta not to reveal it, not to confess, not to tell the truth. And on the basis of that cascading of lies, like a pancake of lies, right? We had the Iraq invasion, we've had chaos and war in Afghanistan ever since. We've had thousands of people being killed in Iraq, and then it overspilled into Syria. We've had a meltdown or near meltdown in Syria. We've had ISIS running around slaughtering our archaeologists, So when you start doing the Omerta thing and silencing, you get moral chaos and meltdown. And that's, as a philosopher, as someone, I belong to the indigenous community of Britain that are the people of the truth for our region. What we say as Druids is we have to tell the truth. We have a duty to. And I would therefore ask all the people of the Omerta, the Pax, whether in Britain or in America or wherever, who have knowledge about actually either the 9/11 catastrophe. I'm setting up a historical commission of inquiry into 9/11. I'm the first trained, qualified professional historian, because that's one of my hats. And I run Historians for Peace to actually bother enough to set this thing up. It will be done on Zoom on the September the 11th this year. And if you are a historian, or whether you're an amateur or just interested in history, or if you are an academic historian with qualifications, then join in, write to me. We will include you, if possible, in the discussion. And we are going to go into this with a fine-tooth comb. Read my 2-volume, 900-page book on the history of 9/11 first, please, so you know where we're coming from. And then join us and contact me. And it's the opposite of the Omerta vow. To join it, you have to take the oath of truth-telling. If you have some information about who might have been behind it, then please share that. If you have evidence, if you have historical facts, please share them. If we come together from throughout the planet and we can use, modern technology to do that, then we will find out the truth. That's the plan. So it's anti the Omerta of silencing that's occurred. The same with Brexit. So again, I appeal, if you have knowledge of who broke the law, which laws they broke, people like Carol Cadwallader, people like Chris Wiley, I take my hat off to you for your courage and speaking out. Keep going. And, many more whistleblowers need to come out. I see that finally some voices are writing against the so-called European Research Group, speaking out against Daniel Hannan and his cronies, who were the intellectual architects of Brexit. One of them has revealed that Daniel Hannan had a great love for Alistair Crowley when he was an Oxford graduate, student. I mean, that's typical. That's the occult sort of dark forces sneaking around behind the scenes, proud of their power to destruct. These are the chaos magicians that have brought us Brexit. The Daniel Hannans, the Steve Bannon's, another chaos magician, up to his neck in Alistair Crowleyism, and all the dark forces. Well, I practice order magic. As an archdruid of peace, my counter magic to all that is just order magic, which is premised on truth, the principle of Ma'at. And Ma'at has 7 virtues or qualities that she inculcates on her followers and devotees. And when we die, we're based on our adherence to those qualities. And one of them is truth. Ma'at insists on truth for her devotees, such as I am. So there's 2 practical things, and to end on, it's time to call the silence over, because the people of truth, need to come out of the woodwork. Why do we go to Stonehenge and celebrate the sunrise? Why do Druids do that? It's not just the physical sun that is beautiful. It's the metaphysical sun of light and Akal, divine reason, the fire in us that we celebrate, which needs to come back onto this planet. We've been suffering from this time of darkness long enough. We've been letting these liars get away with their chaos wars, their chaos magic. And it's time to call, time to call an end to that innings. Time to let the other guys go into bat, to use the cricketing metaphor. And it's all out, folks. The people of darkness, the people of the shadows, you're bowled out. Right, I'm going to finish now with a little poem, because that's my my last offering, and as you know, I'm a poet amongst every other thing, because I'm going to finish with two things. First is a little quote from the Quran. I did promise this. Because everything I'm saying you can find in the sacred scriptures. You know, if you study the Quran, if you study the Gospels, if you study the Upanishads, the books of Enoch, you know, the Talmud, the Bible, any of these, the Zohar, you will see everything I'm saying. You know, what I'm saying is what I call Metaorthodox. So, no, far from being a heretic, I'm the guy that's pieced together the orthodoxy within them all and found the meta-orthodoxy, which is the universal truth that they all point towards. And you can reach enlightenment from whichever starting box you're in. And I'd love it if somebody would like to devise a computer game based on the periodic table, where the aspirant, the initiate, has to go through initiations and many, many lifetimes. You know, they incarnate and they have to do each box, and finally when they've done all 164, they can go to the palace of Shambhala and live in the heavenly library, which is, you know, they might meet me there as the librarian up there. But, so learn the scriptures of every box, study them, learn them inwardly as well as outwardly. Go for the batin, as the Arabic has it, the batin as well as the external. And then you will be able to help. At that point you qualify as a planetary healer. Only when you've mastered this lot can you actually be a planetary mediator between all these religious conflicts that are going on. And that's what we need. We need more proper, fully qualified, educated, holistic, joined-up thinkers to come forward. And if you think you qualify, if you've studied this table and can do a written exam on it, then I'll consider you to join the Multi-Faith Mediation Service. Talking of which, we have the sad events in Hagia Sophia as the clash between, should this be a holy site for the Muslims? They want it back as a mosque. Well, no, the secularites say it should be a museum, and there's been some tension. The Religions of Peace, the group I used to be the Secretary General for 10 years in the UK and Ireland, has issued a very wise statement calling for calm. I think that it's quite good that it's going to be used for prayers again. It shouldn't just be a museum. It should be a place for the living spirit of wisdom. But I think it would be nice to let a Christian group have part of the upper floors. There's a sort of balcony at Hagia Sophia, and they could have their little church area, and you could have Orthodox there and Anglican there and Catholic there. I don't see why not. That would be very generous. I would go as far as to say let the Jews have a little bit for a synagogue area. It's big enough, you see. And why not let the worshippers of Artemis have a bit of a Ephesus like candle lighting ceremony and relight the flame in Ephesus, I still think that Ephesus should be relit as a flame. And I don't see this as contradictory to Islam, contradictory to the authentic Islam, which is the innermost interpretation of the tradition. So I only hope that wise people will be running Hagia Sophia for the Islamic community, not sort of fanatical literalists, and that they'd be open to it being used on its upper floor for an interfaith approach. Anyway, here's a beautiful couple of passages from An-Nur, the Surah I'm doing commentary on. Okay, seest thou not that it is God whose praises all beings in the heavens and on earth do celebrate, and the birds of the air with outstretched wings? Each one knows its own mode of prayer and praise, and God knows well all that they do. Now I love this verse. It's verse 41 of An-Nur, which is Surah 34. I've always felt this, that everything in nature, like trees and birds and insects and animals, and they all praise the Lord in their own way. I mean, I have a cat, and I know she loves God in her own way. I don't understand the inner workings of the cat mind, but she is a pious little being. You can see her at night, sitting and looking at the moon or the stars, or lolling about in the heat of the day. And I think it's the same with birds. I watch birds as they fly and they dip, and they're obviously having such fun. And then at sunset, they gather on the trees near here, and they do this incredible chorus to the sun. And then in the dawn as well. I believe the Quran, I think Muhammad saw all this. He knew, and he saw, and in his superconsciousness, which is the source, angelically tinged of these verses, and I explained that in my commentary, then he knew that every creature actually praises the source of being in its own way. So it's an ecological verse, this. Yea, to God belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth. And to God is the final goal of all. I can agree with that. And in the commentary I've interpreted that in some detail. What I like particularly here is the idea of the final goal is to God, because this is the Aristotelian idea of the telos. Aristotle said everything that's alive is alive because it has a sense of purpose. It's trying to do something, it's fulfilling some telos within it. Everything from the tiniest little cell that my body's made up of to the like the UN or the European Union or major sort of aggregates of intelligent people coming together to solve world problems. The telos is the direction that we work towards, and what the Quran is saying, ultimately it takes us back to God. Now that's an eschatological experience, that happens after the soul is liberated from the physical body. When the physical body wears out and dies, the soul then also continues its journey to that ultimate goal of the telos, which is described by Aristotle as pure love. Not many people realise Aristotle was really quite a mystic, and he said, in the Metaphysics, he says, the telos that we're all aiming for, the divine ultimate, is love, which is what we meet when we get back to the goal, which is God. So it's not something scary, it's not something to be afraid of, it's not, when you're a child and you go through an atheist period and you think God's a big tyrant and, you hate God. No, it's not that kind of a God. That's a silly God that exoteric religions are forced onto people. And that should be rejected. No, it's the inner God of authentic wisdom traditions, which is love. And that's what the Gospels say. That's what Christ was teaching. That's where Christ was coming from, because he knew that. He'd got home. He'd glimpsed God the Father as love. And he was trying to explain to his disciples how this works. No one comes to the Father except by me. What that means is, follow this path of divine love, and I can introduce you to the Father. You can realize. Well, the Quran is saying exactly the same thing. Different language, 600 years apart, but it's coming from the same place. Anyway, that's just a little glimpse of my commentary. I'm not going to, I'll read just the last one more verse from this lovely Surah, An-Nur, the light. So this is verse 35. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. The parable of his light is, as it were, there were a niche, and within it a lamp, the lamp enclosed in glass, the glass, as it were, a brilliant star, lit from a blessed tree, an olive, neither of the east nor of the west.